As I sit here, there's a tremendous migration beginning back into equities. The PIMCO story is starting to cool off. American Funds is back in favor. Putnam is cranking it up. Vanguard's making a commitment. The Alger story is a great one. So I want to talk about equities here. Now, as you know, I don't do technical jargon. I don't think charts and graphs are going to convince anybody to buy equities. The deciding factor is going to be you and your powers of persuasion. So let's you and I together right now build a very persuasive equities argument. Now, before we do that, let me make 3 simple points, all soft skill points. I'm a big soft skills guy, as you know. Point number 1, if someone's going to take your advice, open an account with you, only 3 things have to happen. Number 1, they must like you. Number 2, they must trust you. And number 3, they must think you're smart. They must see you as the expert. There's nothing else. Don't overcomplicate this business. Secondly, I believe in my heart someone should open an account with you without hearing one investment recommendation. This business is not about investing. It's about relationships. And point number 3, it's our job now and for the immediate future to change the way people look at equity investing. We've got to get them to focus on the outcome rather than the experience. Focus on the destination, not the journey. A share of stock is not a lottery ticket. So here's the bottom line. Equity investing is not an option. Nobody can save enough money to retire comfortably. Now, the operative word is comfortably. My 85-year-old friends retired 20 years ago on $30,000 and $40,000. They're struggling. They're paying $80 to gas up their cars. So if someone today wants to retire on $100,000 and prices are going to triple while they're retired, they need the ability to generate $300,000 in income. At 5%, that takes $6 million. If someone's going to retire today and never think about money again, we're talking $10 million. No one can save that amount of money. So we've got to get people to act. The challenge is they're getting so much information, they're losing their common sense. How's this taking place? Because the data is commoditized. All the information's out there. We have 8,500 magazines and newspapers telling your client what to do. Over 2,000 TV channels, 200 million websites. All the data is commoditized, but you know what's missing is your opinion. Your speaking style can't be copied. So let's tell them a great story in your style. Stories are non-threatening. People can sit back and enjoy a story. They don't think they're being sold something. Except this story you're telling them is not about them. It's about them, but it's their story with a different ending. It's not a story about you and equities. It's about them with a happy ending. So I'm going to give you the greatest equity story ever told, and let's go from there, and let's realize to begin with, every generation is looking for reasons not to invest. What we have in play here are risk tolerance, risk perception, and recency bias. Now let me stop here for a moment and just explain those 3 things. Recency bias, Horse's Mouth did a great job explaining it. You're driving along and you see a speed trap. You slow down, even though no one's chasing you, because there might be another one. That's recency bias. You and I know the market's been up 80% since March of 2008. Clients know we've had 2 catastrophes in the last 12 years, 2 bear markets, and there's going to be a third one. You can't change their mind about that. You can't change recency bias. You can't change risk tolerance. They're as tolerant as they are. They've been the same way since they were kids. Either they take risk or they don't. What you can change is perception. So we're going to change your client's perception with this story. We're going to be confident, we're going to be enthusiastic, we're going to be positive, and we're going to focus on the long term. So let's talk about this mainstream media contrivances. They create these disasters and get the client's eye off that disastrous ball. The 4 most dangerous words in the English language, this time it's different. Let me just take a moment to set the stage here. Every generation is looking for reasons not to invest. 9/11 was a reason not to invest. The fiscal cliff is a reason not to invest. Well, I asked myself, how many times has a baby boomer been told not to invest, or a baby boomer's parents? How many 9/11s have occurred in that person's lifetime? Let's go back. The first baby was born in 1946. So I started in 1950. And I went back, the Dow Jones Industrial Average on the first trading day in 1950, January 3rd, market closed at 198.89. Now, I've done this in a longer format in another setting, so I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I'll just give you a couple things that happened in each decade. How were the 50s as far as investing? Well, terrible things happened. It was the Korean War. Shortly after World War II, where 500,000 Americans died and 4 million Germans died and 20 million Russians died, we're back at it again in the Korean War, almost 40,000 more American soldiers dying. That same decade, the Soviets tested a fission bomb. America was told for the first time in its own bed, that Americans were told for the first time they're not safe in their own beds. But how did the market do in the 1950s? In 1950, it was 198.89. Beginning in 1960, the Dow is at 679.06. That's an enormous gain. The 60s began with John Kennedy walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, ended with Timothy Leary and Woodstock in Vietnam. Our heroes didn't die in the 60s. Our heroes were shot dead in the streets. Malcolm X and Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy and Martin Luther King. That tore the very fabric of the country. Those were huge events. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan attacked Israel, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. Israel put that down in 6 days and said, if you do that again, we'll reshape the Middle East. It was Vietnam. It was a terrible decade. But where did the Dow start in the 1970s? 809.29. In the 70s, we lost the decade. But so what? We lost the decade recently. The 70s, we lost the same decade, followed by 40 years of prosperity. The 70s saw the worst recession in 40 years. Saw the fall of South Vietnam. Saw the 3 Mile Island leak, the OPEC oil embargo. All those things, the worst bear market since 1929. So at the end of 10 years, the Dow basically was unchanged. So we're into 1980, after this down decade, with the Dow opening at 824. What happened in the 80s is unbelievable. The Pope was shot, 14% inflation, 21% mortgages, the crash of 87, Ronald Reagan was shot, the S&L scandal, the Challenger exploded, on and on, the Iran-Contra affair. The decade was unbelievable for bad news. In the Iranian hostage crisis in 1979, there were 3 networks. Now in the 80s, there's cable television. But what did the Dow do? It opened in the 90s at 2753. Let me take you back to the 90s. You want to start with the Gulf War, Civil War in Yugoslavia, the bombing in Oklahoma City, the Soviets defaulting on all their bonds. Remember the phrase Asian contagion? Remember Mexican currency crisis? The president was impeached. How about Y2K? All of that took place. What did the Dow do? It started the year 2000 at over 11,200. We lost a decade. We had red states, blue states, John Kerry, George Bush, Hurricane Katrina. It was a horrible, horrible decade. We lost it. But what happened after the year 2000? The Prime Minister of Greece resigned. The Prime Minister of Italy resigned. Occupy Wall Street. J.P. Morgan Chase lost $5.8 billion in bad trades. The fiscal cliff, all that stuff. Where is the Dow as I sit here? It's over 13,000 at the end of 2012 and climbing. Look, 2 things never change. And those are the only things that matter. First thing that never changes is your clients always have goals, and secondly, you've got to run a business. Now, great dancers aren't great dancers because of their technique. They're great dancers because of their passion. Martha Graham said that. Believe the equity story and tell it with passion. Your passion will be contagious, I assure you.